Hi, and welcome to today's Engaging for Missouri webinar. I'm Alice Roach from the Division of Applied Social Sciences at the University of Missouri, and I'll be your host today. With each of these 30-minute webinars, we intend to share research-based insights that leaders like you can apply in your own work to benefit and strengthen the state's agriculture and food system, hospitality sector, and communities. Today, Dr. Scott Brown will share an update about the ShowMeState Food, Beverage, and Forest Products Manufacturing Initiative. Before I invite Scott to begin, however, I want to share a few housekeeping items. First, we'll close today's webinar with a question and answer session. Those of you who connected today via your computer can submit your questions in the chat screen. So to do that, just click the chat button that you see at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you joined today by phone, then you can email me your questions at roacham@missouri.edu. Second, all attendees are muted and may not start their video. Third, if you encounter any technical problems during today's webinar, then please let me know by submitting a comment in the chat screen, or you can also send me an email at roacham@missouri.edu, and I'll do my best to help you troubleshoot. Fourth, we will make a recording of today's presentation available. You can look for an email from Zoom that shares more about where you can access that recording in about a day from now. You can also find an archive of all of our previous Engaging for Missouri webinars on our division's YouTube channel. So now we'll transition to the topic of today's webinar, which is titled A Possible Path Forward for the ShowMeState Food, Beverage, and Forest Products Manufacturing Initiative in a COVID-19 World. Presenting is Dr. Scott Brown, who is an Associate Agricultural and Applied Economics Extension Professor, and he's also the Director of Strategic Partnerships for MU's College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources. So thank you, Scott, for presenting today. If you could please unmute your microphone and start your video, then we can begin today's presentation.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Alice. It's good to be here this morning to have a chance to visit on the Food and Beverage Manufacturing Initiative. I enjoyed seeing a number of the participants who have been a part of the food and beverage process from the beginning on this webinar today. So I'll start by just saying thanks to all of you that have been involved. For a minute, I want to remind us a little bit about the ShowMeState Food, Beverage, and Forest Products Manufacturing Initiative. It's been a broad effort that's involved many facets of Missouri agriculture. It is not just a College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources initiative at the University of Missouri. It is trying to involve all of our higher education institutions around the state. It was really led by the start of an executive order by Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe. The Department of Agriculture here at the state of Missouri has also been important, as is all of our commodity organizations, as well as a lot of industry representation that I've seen over the last couple of years. So a very broad effort, and I want to make sure that I make this point right away. There is so much interest in the initiative itself, and I think for all of us, it's easy to see the end point. But I remind us, we get to the end point one brick at a time. Everyone has a part. It might be a more production ag-oriented part, or it might be a processing part, or it might be a retailing part. But it takes everyone, and I think sometimes we forget that this is not simple in terms of moving us quickly from one direction or another. So there are a lot of leaders that will need to be involved as we push this effort forward. And so for those that expect this is easy, or that we're going to look up tomorrow and have a bunch of new economic activity, I think this is the long-term investment in Missouri agriculture that could be helpful. And yes, I think if I had this to do over again, I would certainly not want to do it in a period where a pandemic has broken out. It has certainly slowed things down. However, if you just kind of look back at the timing for a minute, it was really started, and frankly by some others besides myself on campus, with a taxonomy study that really tried to lay out what's at stake in terms of the economics of the initiative. That study was supported by a number of different organizations within Missouri agriculture. that report wasn't completed until February of 2019. By June of 2019, we saw the executive order being signed that established the task force. And I will say from late June, when that executive order was established, until we finished in October with what was a round of information gathering meetings, it was as quick as I've seen that kind of activity unfold, where you're trying to get so many different participants and players in agriculture involved. I think it was about March 7th of 2020 that we were at Farm Bureau's offices as the voting members of the task force completed the final report. It was unanimously approved by all the voting members of the task force. And then we really got into the worst of COVID-19, and what is in red where it says rollout of the next steps plan got postponed. We have in the last 10 days or so been back to talking about delivery of the second report. So that second report was really, what did we hear in the listening sessions, and what are the next steps from there? And although it may seem like it's been forever as we've been talking about this, I go still, even in the COVID-19 reality, this initiative has been on the fast track, and so let's not forget and we'll not lose the momentum that I think has really been started relative to that initiative. All right, so I remind us that I think, frankly, the Food and Beverage and Forest Products Manufacturing Initiative itself could be more important now than ever in a COVID-19 world. When you look back at the original work done by Techonomy, an additional $25 billion in economic activity, if we were to focus our efforts on increasing value-added agriculture, 70,000 new jobs, more state and local tax revenue, and even talking about increasing commodity production sales of our traditional, farm level commodities. We're going to need that kind of growth as we try to hopefully come out of a COVID-19 pandemic in the coming months. So I think this initiative could be even more important. I want to come around to, what were we really drilling down to in terms of the key issues. And I think, number one, the question we were really asking the listening session participants, so what are the constraints? What's holding back this business and economic advancement? What actions need to happen? Is it research oriented? Is it regulatory relief? Is it new infrastructure? What's the expertise needed to take Missouri's food, beverage, and forest products to the next level, if you will? And I would add, as you think about some of those issues, rural development continue to come up as one of the important issues. I think if we can push forward here, we have a great opportunity to really grow many parts of rural Missouri. And coming from a farm background, I'll say production agriculture is important to many parts of rural Missouri, but having added value occur in some of these rural locations in Missouri could be a risk management strategy against lower economic output in some of those areas. So being able to build there, I think, is certainly important. If we look at the three thrusts, and many of you have seen this, so it's not new, but I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about each of these thrusts. So the Missouri Food Entrepreneur Network, or MO-FEN as it's been dubbed, I always kind of view that's the area that would be led by higher education, potentially by University of Missouri Extension as well. So what's the ability of that network of individuals to help new and beginning food interest to grow their business? I think there's all kinds of potential help that's needed from business planning to, do I need a test kitchen? How do I do a pilot plant, if I will? I need a process authority. So I think those are some of the areas where MO-FEN is going to see the most benefit. I think that in a COVID-19 world, many of us in higher education institutions in the state are working very hard to get students back in the classroom. So it's been maybe a little bit slowed, but I think we'll come back to that as we come out of some of the COVID-19 issues that we face. I will remind us, I don't think these three thrust areas are mutually exclusive. I think they're complementary to each other. So I don't want to provide the idea that, hey, we're doing these three and there's no interconnections between them. I think there's a lot of connections. To the higher ed, so we often at Kaffner talk about the Food for the 21st Century program. It was one that's been in place for, frankly, decades, that was investing in research to lead to new initiative or new ideas out there. And I sometimes look at this food, beverage, and forest products manufacturing initiative as maybe the next step in that F21C evolution. We could talk about a new thrust. I think that's long-term benefit from investing in new research, but I think all of us in higher education institutions around the state have the chance to benefit. Going to the second thrust area, the Missouri Food, Feed, Fiber, Fuel, and Forest Institute. What a mouthful we made on that one, but MO-5. I think MO-5 is that kind of traditional commodity thrust, if you will. So how do we make sure that we grow what we're already good at? How do we add value to that? I'll take, cattle's a good example. I often heard at some of the listening sessions the idea that we need to feed more cattle in Missouri and process more cattle in Missouri, and I'll save a lot of that discussion. But to me, that's one of the areas MO-5 might be interested in. It could be biofuels. It could be how do we harvest some of the forest land that we have in the state and develop new products. I think, as the task force has worked on that, we see that more being led out of the commodity organizations around the state, where MO-FEN might be more led by higher eds, MO-5 being more commodity organization driven. And so you're going to hear more about MO-5's plans here in the coming days for sure, because just email traffic even this morning that is trying to push forward on where to best move MO-5 as we look ahead. The last one, Healthy Foods Institute, we got a lot of discussion at the listening sessions related to the concept of healthy foods or designer foods for health, if you will. I think even pre-COVID-19, we were slowing how quickly we would talk about that third thrust area, only because there's probably more long-term research there that needs to have some focus before we can talk about lifting that too far. So I would say that one still sets us kind of in that third slot, if you will, but I think many see the very long-term possibilities that would correspond. As I look at all these thrust areas, I think there's economic issues, there's business planning issues, there's rural development issues, there's physical production issues. How do I get a product from farm to retail? If you look back at that Techonomy study and what it was really telling us, it was telling us a lot about, we produce a lot of raw ag commodities extremely well in this state, but too often we don't add any value to them. And adding that value could be very important to helping grow the overall footprint of Missouri agriculture. As we think about COVID-19 and again, the opportunities for the initiative, so we're going to need job creation in Missouri. I was just pulling some of the unemployment numbers yesterday. We're down 120,000 relative to a year ago. we're going to need new jobs, new opportunities for folks as we try to climb out of a pretty tough economic situation with what COVID-19 has dealt us. I like to remind us, when you look at U.S. economic activity, it looks like to me, from those that are forecasting kind of the 30,000 foot macro data that's out there, we've got to get to 2022 before we talk about things like GDP being back to levels that we would have seen in 2019 in real terms. And when you think about Missouri in particular, where agriculture is the #1 industry, we say it a lot, but I remind us, agriculture is going to have to play a role in that job creation. So I think the initiative could create new job opportunities. As well, I think we have some very direct effects that COVID-19's had on agriculture that the initiative could frankly be helpful to. And I'll save for a minute, but I just remind us that costs from farm to retail have grown as a result of COVID-19. Does this initiative help us in terms of changing that direct cost? And last, I go, consumers matter in this discussion. We all have our own thoughts about how consumer behavior has changed. I think it's still too early in the process, but the idea of, are consumers more interested in local food? What's food at home consumption like? We all have seen some of the runs on supermarkets that occurred in late March. How about food away from home? What's the landscape look like once we get beyond this post-COVID situation? So I think understanding what long-term consumer demand changes are unfolding as a result of COVID-19 can help the initiative better focus on how to best use its dollars going forward. So I'm an economist. I have to have graphs. I just can't have a bunch of bullet slides. So a couple of graphs for you. And of course, maybe one too complicated right out of the gate because it has both a left and right-hand axis. But I want to talk about the black line here for a minute first. So prices received by farmers. It's off the left-hand side of the axis. We tend to talk about farm prices being more volatile than consumer prices. The other line, the gold line on this graph, the consumer price index for food being plotted off the right-hand side. But you notice historically what's been a fairly good correlation between farm level prices and retail level prices. Yet when you look at just the last few observations as we've seen COVID-19 really affect us, we see what's been higher consumer prices and lower prices received by farmers. Now, this is not specific. It's across all prices received by farmers. It's also the overall consumer price index for food. But the idea that we're adding costs, some of those are related with just how to deal with COVID-19 and, let's say, a meat processing plant. We have more social distancing, more safety measures in place. That's likely slowed lines to some extent. I'm not sure some of those costs don't stay with us for a while. And if we want more value back to agriculture, figuring out how to be more efficient in dealing with the effects of COVID-19, I think could be important. And of course so I want to go back to the cattle discussion just a little bit, because to me, we're already seeing some of the wins that occur from the focus on food, beverage, and forest products manufacturing. If you think about the $20 million that is available for meat processors in Missouri to help modernize plants, if you will, I think that's truly a result of what you see in this graph. And this is U.S. daily cattle slaughter. It's a 6-day moving average. You still have some issues where we have holidays in place that affect that 6-day moving average. So across the bottom, it's days in the year. You see the black line that's there. When it's at its bottom, when we were below 75,000 head a day, that was the worst of COVID-19. You can see we have had some amazing recovery. I remind us that when we were back in that less than 75,000 head, I think many would have said it's going to take months, if not even longer, for processing capacity to return, and we've done it amazing quickly. Yet there's still a lot of thoughts about how do we make the system better? How do we make the system less disrupted if these kinds of events were to happen again? And I think that's where local processors, that discussion has been occurring. Again, if you think about some of the discussion of we need to feed more cattle in Missouri, we need to process more cattle in Missouri so we can add value to them, I think we need to be very thoughtful as we think about how to implement something like that. I will say, will consumers be interested in a Missouri branded product? If so, and we could get a premium for that product, I think that helps us. But we are going to have to make sure that there's some value add there. I think when you talk about small processing plants, there are economies of scale associated with running some of these larger plants. And so we've got to be able to compete relative, and maybe being in that commodity beef business isn't where Missouri's niche is. It may be very much in some type of specialty product that we do better than anyone else. I will often say, I believe Missouri cattle producers have the highest quality cattle of anywhere in the country. And that's not just the meat in those cattle, it's everything from start to finish. So how do we take advantage of what I believe are comparative advantages in Missouri? So that has, to me, a lot to do with the initiative related to the food, beverage, and forest products manufacturing initiative. In summary, it's undoubtedly COVID-19 slowed progress on the initiative. I keep saying this is long game. This is not something that we were going to do in months. This is something that we're going to do over years. We can't turn this off overnight. We are committed. I would say certainly the college is committed to moving this forward. And I think in a recovery from COVID-19, the initiative can even get more traction as a result of we need to grow the Missouri economy back to the idea that CAFNR does have as a strategic initiative this ShowMeState food, beverage, and forest products manufacturing growth. So we're not walking away from it. I just, as I close, want to give us a few examples. And again, I've already talked about the state investment in meat processing. I see other grant and investment opportunities unfolding. I've been a part of some conversations that have been happening in the St. Louis area where I go, this is exactly what we need. How do we help these new startups that may be in that ag space get grants to help them get started? I see us at the University of Missouri also having applied for grants that I expect some reasonable success from, that I think start to grow the pot of money available. I was talking to the dean just yesterday. We're committed to that hiring of a local process authority within the college. But those folks don't grow on trees, so we're going very slowly to make sure that we get the right person. But we need that process authority here on campus. And I give a shout out to the other higher eds as well. So I see the Ag Learning Center at Northwest Missouri State, a lot of discussion about how that might fit in trying to help grow new investment, new business opportunities in different parts of the state. And I think that's the important piece of this. It's not just one of us, it's all the higher education institutions around the state that will need to be a part of that. And with that, I'll close, and I think Alice is going to drive us for some questions.
Yes, thank you, Scott. If you do have a question, please go ahead and submit that in the chat screen, or you can also send it to me via email at roacham@missouri.edu. Scott, as a place to start, we do have a question submitted about where you think the state's crop industry might fit in this initiative. So specialty crops, produce honey, mushrooms, and so forth.
So number one, it fits, so that one of my points is I think it's not one single commodity. And so I think MO-FEN provides a good place for maybe some of these startup operations, whether it's what I might say is non-traditional. I don't mean to speak poorly when I say that. I think we have to invest in all of the areas, and some of these new products could become larger markets for us. And so I think that there's, again, lots of opportunity for that kind of growth. Now, I think it's up to us pushing in all of the directions at the same time in those efforts. But I see the growth in MO-FEN being most helpful to some of those areas.
Great, thank you. We have another question here that's getting at the idea that some increased production of agricultural products is somewhat limited by land availability in some cases. So can you speak to the potential of technologies like greenhouses as a tool to increase economic activity in the agriculture industry?
Yeah, so one of our listening sessions that we held in Jefferson City, we had a long discussion about, how do we create these new opportunities, and greenhouses were certainly one of them. So if you were to ring around maybe some of the more metropolitan areas, the idea of more fruits and vegetables kind of production in a greenhouse setting, does that create some value added, create some diversity? If you look at the economy report originally, I think that was one of the maybe things they were pointing out, was that we're really good at what we might consider traditional commodities grown in this state, but we're not good at how do we get new commodities to be a part. And I think these kinds of ideas about greenhouses and whether they sit as an opportunity, I think for me, that's all finding the partners and investment needed to make those happen. In a COVID-19 world, I think there's a place here again where if you create something closer to consumers, it may help on the cost side of that equation. That could really be important.
Great, thanks. One of the charts that you displayed showed the increasing wedge between farm and consumer prices here recently. So given this change, have you seen or do you anticipate more producers considering producer-owned value-added businesses? So either those that are maybe owned by one family or a co-op. And then how can the initiative help those kinds of businesses? I think that kind of aligns with that MO-FEN initiative.
I think it does in many ways. And I guess I think over time we'll unravel some of the costs associated with COVID-19 effects, but I think it's very perceptive on someone's part who asked that question that if you don't like those costs that are now being borne, how do you become a part of those? I remind folks all the time that if you decide you want to buy up into the chain, not only do you have to be a good producer, then all of a sudden you got to potentially be a good marketer. So one wants to think about which of those chains, that pieces of the chain from farm to consumer they want to be a piece of, and make sure they understand that they're an expert in all those things. You can't be an average marketer, for example. I think the idea of co-ops is a good one in terms of maybe you can bring together groups of producers to better manage across that group in terms of adding value. But in some cases, smaller opportunities may exist. And this is where I go, yeah, be a good producer, but then I've seen wonderful examples of smaller opportunities where not only is that individual a good producer, but they're also a great marketer. Ultimately, if you find products that consumers want in Missouri, I think the value that can be added, or the value that can be captured, I should say, is very great.
Great, thanks for that. Another question here is asking about whether there's an opportunity to use federal or state COVID funds for this initiative.
So I think we're still exploring all of those possibilities. I think when I look back at the $20 million available for some of the renovation to meat processing that's occurring here in the state, that's a first use of what I see as COVID dollars available to help. And so I think we're already seeing some of that. I think there could be more to come. From a federal perspective, I always struggle with, we've already provided a lot of stimulus. I'm not commenting that that's bad when I say that, but it does add to the federal debt in this country, and future rounds of stimulus are yet to have been worked out, and plenty of politics to try to get those to the finish line. So we'll see what kind of funds are available. I think the most important thing is this: we need to have identified opportunities that could unfold more quickly, that would compete well if there are funds available either at the state level or federal level related to rebuilding the economy as a result of COVID-19. And I think that's what the initiative could see itself being focused on.
Great. We have time for one more question, and it's about hemp. So are we seeing new opportunities around Missouri's new hemp industry, and how might that align with the initiative?
So I think for sure, I sometimes said it went from industrial hemp to whiskey to forests to you name it. We had all kinds of different products that were being talked about. Industrial hemp has certainly been of interest. I think that hemp has its place in terms of providing new opportunities. I don't think we're going to grow thousands of acres of hemp anytime soon in this state, but for those that want to focus on the hemp industry, I think the initiative, number one, has a place. How do we help that industry? It probably is one of those that I would say gets both some MO-5 as well as MO-FEN help. There's some opportunities to maybe grow some new products that are maybe smaller, newer operations that want to get launched. At the same time, I think MO-5, where we're talking about maybe more traditional commodities, how do we use that industrial hemp in some of the manufactured products that could come from hemp? I see some really good opportunities already unfolding in Southeast Missouri, where we're talking about almost that full circle of waste products from other manufacturing processes being used as fertilizer to grow industrial hemp in some parts of Southeast Missouri. And how does that industrial hemp then go back into manufacturing products? The idea we have that circle created, I see a lot of good efforts going on there, and I think those will continue.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Scott, for sharing today's presentation and for taking our questions. And thank you to our audience too. When you exit Zoom, you'll see a post-webinar survey will load in your browser. If you would please consider responding, we use the results to improve the webinar experience and also brainstorm future topics. Again, you should receive a recording of today's presentation via your email sometime tomorrow. You can join us for our next Engaging for Missouri webinar on Wednesday, September 16th. At that time, Dr. Mallory Ray, who is an Assistant Agricultural and Applied Economics Extension Professor, will share a presentation titled Building Rural Wealth Through a Value Chain Approach. Again, thanks so much for joining us and have a great Wednesday. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks.